Manders. Indeed? I thought you had lived almost exclusively in artistic circles. Oswald. So I have. Manders. And chiefly among the younger artists? Oswald. Yes, certainly. Manders. But I thought few of those young fellows could afford to set up house and support a family. Oswald. There are many who cannot afford to marry, sir. Manders. Yes, that is just what I say. Oswald. But they may have a home for all that, and several of them have, as a matter of fact, and very pleasant, well-ordered homes they are, too. Mrs. Alving follows with breathless interest, nods, but says nothing. Manders. But I'm not talking of bachelor's quarters. By a home, I understand the home of a family, where a man lives with his wife and children. Oswald. Yes, or with his children and his children's mother. Manders. Starts, clasps his hands. But good heavens. Oswald. Well? Manders lives with his children's mother. Oswald. Yes. Would you have him turn his children's mother out of doors? Manders. Then it is illicit relations you are talking of. Irregular marriages, as people call them. Oswald. I have never noticed anything particularly irregular about the life these people lead. Manders. But how is it possible that a young man or young woman with any decency of feeling can endure to live in that way, in the eyes of all the world? Oswald. What are they to do? A poor young artist, a poor girl. Marriage costs a great deal. What are they to do? Manders. What are they to do? Let me tell you, Mr. Alving, what they ought to do. They ought to exercise self-restraint from the first. That is what they ought to do. Oswald. That doctrine will scarcely go down with warm-blooded young people who love each other. Mrs. Alving. No, scarcely. Manders. Continuing. How can the authorities tolerate such things? Allow them to go on in the light of day? Confronting Mrs. Alving. Had I not cause to be deeply concerned about your son, in circles where open immorality prevails, and has even a sort of recognized position? Oswald. Let me tell you, sir, that I have been in the habit of spending nearly all my Sundays in one or two such irregular homes. Manders. Sunday of all days. Oswald. Isn't that the day to enjoy oneself? Well, never have I heard an offensive word, and still less have I witnessed anything that could be called immoral. No. Do you know when and where I have come across immorality in artistic circles? Manders. No, thank heaven I don't. Oswald. Well then, allow me to inform you. I have met with it when one or other of our pattern husbands and fathers has come to Paris to have a look round on his own account, and has done the artists the honor of visiting their humble haunts. They knew what was what. These gentlemen could tell us all about places and things we had never dreamt of. Manders. What? Do you mean to say that respectable men from home here would— Oswald, have you never heard these respectable men, when they got home again, talking about the way in which immorality runs rampant abroad? Manders. Yes, no doubt. Mrs. Alving. I have too. Oswald. Well, you may take their word for it. They know what they are talking about. Presses has hands to his head. Oh, that great, free, glorious life out there should be defiled in such a way. Mrs. Alving. You mustn't get excited, Oswald. It's not good for you. Oswald. Yes, you're quite right, Mother. It's bad for me, I know. You see, I'm wretchedly worn out. I shall go for a little turn before dinner. Excuse me, Pastor. I know you can't take my point of view, but I couldn't help speaking out. He goes out by the second door to the right. Mrs. Alving, my poor boy. Manders. You may well say so. Then this is what he has come to. Mrs. Alving looks at him silently. Manders. Walking up and down. He called himself the prodigal son. Alas. Alas. Mrs. Alving continues looking at him. Manders. And what do you say to all this? Mrs. Alving. I say that Oswald was right in every word. Manders. Stands still. Right? Right in such principles? Mrs. Alving. Here, in my loneliness, I have come to the same way of thinking, Pastor Manders, but I have never dared to say anything. Well, now my boy shall speak for me. Manders. You are greatly to be pitied, Mrs. Alving, but now I must speak seriously to you. And now it is no longer your business manager and advisor, your own and your husband's early friend, who stands before you. It is the priest who stood before you in the moment of your life when you had gone farthest astray. Mrs. Alving. And what has the priest to say to me? Manders. I will first stir up your memory a little. The moment is well chosen. Tomorrow will be the 10th anniversary of your husband's death. Tomorrow the memorial in his honor will be unveiled. Tomorrow I shall have to speak to the whole assembled multitude, but today I will speak to you alone, Mrs. Alving. Very well, Pastor Manders. Speak. Manders. Do you remember that after less than a year of married life you stood on the verge of an abyss? That you forsook your house and home? That you fled from your husband? Yes, Mrs. Alving, fled, and refused to return to him, however much he begged and prayed you? Mrs. Alving, have you forgotten how infinitely miserable I was in that first year? Manders. It is the very mark of the spirit of rebellion to crave for hap.